Hi guys, I hope you're all keeping well. If when the well, not when, but soon afterwards, a day or two afterward, the appalling assassination, murder of Charlie Kirk in front of his children, I was thinking, well, there's not going to be really any sort of like esoteric overlay to this, and it was pretty straightforward, awful thing. But I'm now reevaluating my opinion on this, and I think this is probably, it may well be the closing chapter or the final act of the 9/11 wave function. Remember the videos I've spoken about where 9/11 recorded a wave function? It went along for years and then collapsed. Well, it's ending now. It's almost like the opening of the chapter was 9/11, the ending of the chapter was Charlie Kirk. So there's definitely a sense of adjustment happening. We're hearing stories of people suddenly, Christians going back to church and things like that. And it's all tremendously interesting now for me. Now, I knew that there was going to be the truthers were going to lose their minds with this, and there would be an enormous amount of you know, babbling and crazy stuff and distortion and people who know nothing about the occult or much else will start connecting dots in that kind of wild frenzy that they do that creates more bullshit than clarity. And this is part of the kind of the school that we're put through in order to get through this life and develop our occultic sense. It's like what Crowley once said, that every every conscious act you do is a magical act, so you better learn to do it properly. And there's so much truth to that statement. Now, I wasn't expecting it so soon, but I was probably naive in that sense. I had to block someone on my Telegram page feed who came in with the most insane Sonic babble about the whole assassination. That was, it was like trutherism on steroids. He mixed in everything. It was like just the classic sort of mental, cognitive spastic sort of like verbal twitching, chronsonic babble. But having said that, we know with the mentally ill, it's not usually them that's like spewing this stuff, and a lot of truthers are mentally ill. There's an entity behind them, Jerry Mazinski's. That's why I think the whole purpose of the truther thing is that when you fall into the truther abyss at first, you tend to believe all the fucking bullshit that pops into your head, and you accept it as fact. But you have to kind of perform a sort of a self exorcism where you either go one way, where you start sort of distillating the wild, intensity of knowledge at first, new information, I would say, more than knowledge, until you eventually, weed it down into something, distillate it down into something that's manageable in terms of explaining it to yourself and feeling comfortable with it. Because ultimately, that's, you see, if you're going around trying to convince other people, you're in a sort of a Christian evangelical uh, position, and the demon world will grab you and try to destroy you by getting you to do this. So you go into work or with your family, and you start spewing all this freeman of the land stuff, and you associate yourself from it. Now you can go two ways. Well, you go three ways. Most people sadly say, I'm not getting on. I wish I never listened to Alex Jones or David Icke. I'm going back to normal society. That's that's the most common reaction. I'm never talking to watching those videos, those truther videos ever again. The second one are people who learn from it and they go, no, I still think I did get good knowledge, and I did make a lot of mistakes in the early days, but I'm going to sort of distillate myself down and sort of like go on a sort of a mission within myself to find not so much the truth, but a better version of that stuff to live inside me that is applicable to actual bigger things beyond like this sort of like need to evangelize. And then the third one is people who get trapped in the truther sphere forever. Um, After 25 years, they're still, they still have the most, they just dive straight in the first conspiracy video they see and believe all of it without any kind of critical thinking. Now, so that's a catastrophe as well. Now, the third bunch, the ones who spend years, the ones who are the most sort of like, unhinged ones, that just, the pure babbling ones that will write essays or make 4-hour videos on Rumble. Like Jerry Mazinski has told us that within that sort of level of schizophrenia, there is a seed of truth that pops up now and again. And within this like line of absolute bullshit that this guy had printed, sent me like like a fucking essays, the usual thing, you could see them like the eyes and the fingers going on the keyboards like this, and capitals, all capitals now and again to emphasize things. And he said something about like you look at the name Charlie Kirk, you split it up into 3 syllables: Char, Lie, Kirk. Char means to burn, like a charnel house, the burning of bones, charring. The lie, and then the Kirk is the Scottish word for a church. So the lie of the burned church. Now that jumped out at me in the same way that the demonic faces jumped out at me during this. You remember the demonic faces that showed up on the side of the World Trade Center when the smoke was coming out of it? There was people, there was all on the newspapers and everything were saying like, is this the face of the devil on the side of the burning building? Now that simulacrum appears for the same reason, popped into people's head for the same way Charlie Kirk did. It's because it's your subconscious mind telling you there's something more here to this. Now, Carl Jung was a great believer in this kind of thing, through the mandalas and stuff like that. But also, like, remember he had a dream about Liverpool, and he said, he didn't know what the term Liverpool originated from. He didn't know about the liver bird, but he says it's the pool of life. It means to live, And it's funny because he wrote that all not long before Liverpool became like the center of the world with the Beatles and all that stuff. And prior to that, well, at the same time, it was like one of the world's busiest seaports. So like the Mersey Beat stuff. So he was kind of onto a pop cultural thing with that. So you notice these things, but you don't go in a wild frenzy about them. You go, okay, I was meant to see that. So the Charlie Kirk thing, I'd say, well, Charlie Kirk, they said they you could say something like when they shot him, they had a belief that they would burn down the churches because Charlie Kirk was a devout Christian. So, but it didn't happen. So we had the lie of the burnt churches, So, because the exact opposite happened, people started in America, especially started going back to church. I know loads of people here are going back to church. Lots of Catholics are returning to mass and everything here. It's very interesting. So it's another one of those things. We're on the end of the wave function collapse, and I'm not making fun or light of this because it's still. I'm quite shocked and disturbed by what happened to that man and the circumstances in front of his family. And basically, from what I can see right now, it is what it is. It's basically left-wing pedophiles and sex cases, uh, which makes, it's like my friend Tina said today, Kyle Rittenhouse proved to us that if you fire one bullet into a crowd of Antifa, it'll hit at least one pedophile. And that's, we saw that the old guy who was, what's his name, Zinn, who was 71, who they thought was the initial shooter, was screaming, "I shot him," to help Tyler Robinson get away. It turns out now that he's a pedophile. So it's like they're the most stereotypical people of degenerates in the world. And you look at yourself and say, how can these people actually think they're on the right side of reality, of the world? They shot a guy who basically was just basic harmless, His opinions were very kind of middle American. And then you had all these people who are supposedly intellectual people, or people who are supposed to have a certain amount of knowledge, is totally quoting them out of context because they saw a meme somewhere and didn't check. And you say, well, where's this all coming from? You know, and this kind of thing. Why are we this is in our face now? What this is kind of like crescendo. Well, you know, there's an we have to we are living in a splitting timeline. And if I was wrong about the wave function, the 9/11 wave function collapse, it was that initially I'd assumed that the whole of the world would return back to the original pre 9/11 curve timeline. But that's not happening. There's fractured timelines on the downward curve. I have a marker somewhere. There's fractured timelines on the downward curve that are sort of like splintering off, and they don't want to return to the post 9/11 curve, pre 9/11 curve. And so they're moving off. They're literally living in a different reality. Now, I'm wearing two watches today, okay? A digital and an analog watch. And what's the reason for that? Bling? No, they're both cheap watches. But there's and this also is an amazing synchronicity. Yeah, I'm wearing bling. I like those. When I used to live in Bayside in Queens in America, I used to go to the shopping center down by Bay Terrace, and there was all this sort of like these Italian guys in their 60s and 70s, and they had tons of rings on their fingers, and they would walk around the produce. I'm not putting them down. I thought they were kind of cool, actually. They used to walk around the produce department with their fingers hanging down to show how much gold they had. And I found them quite charming. I never thought they were like anything wrong with the guys or anything. It was just that was their culture. But I used to find that like when I'd be shopping in the supermarket to see like 75-year-old Vito going around like this, and he goes, "Hey babes, babe, swing it," yeah, this kind of thing. But bada bing, bada boom, that kind of thing. And capiche, capiche. And oh man, I found most to be very nice people. But it was to me it was charming. It wasn't stupid or anything like that. But no, I'm wearing two timelines because and this is even more. It turns out that like Tyler Robinson and all that gang that he's with, and it looks like it's going to be like literally a conspiracy of like troons are going to be like and Antifa neckbeards and things like that are all going to be like rounded up. And they did it on the Discord group. Now that comes from Discordia. Now I was quite involved with the kind of interested. There was like public access TV shows, and uh, there was things like fanzines. The Magical Child occult shop in Manhattan sold them, and in New York there was a big Discordia scene, and it was mostly around things like hacking, not particularly phone computer hacking, but also phone hacking, telecommunication systems. That was a huge thing, and they would like look for the sort of the master codes of the AT&T system to try and hack in to get free phone calls or listen in on like private phone calls between like Donald Trump and and someone else. But this that scene, when I liked it, was full of when I was sort of like I was doing my own thing. I was never a member of a group or anything, but I was still paying attention. People like Peter Carroll and Phil Hine. The whole chaos magic thing was very, very big at the time in that. So you had like the chaos magic Lovecraftian hacking Discordia thing. Robert Anton Wilson, the Raw Illuminatus trilogy, all that stuff, right? And I mean, fantastic stuff. Now, when social media came along, that was all destroyed, and the Discordia groups, like the Fortean groups on Facebook, are all full of like smarmy neckbeards and socialists and all kinds of other like actually types, those types who live in their mother's basements in their 40s, and you know those types, source, those types. I don't know how that happened, but social media, like the governor of Utah was right when he said that social media has cursed the world. There's a lot of truth to that. I'd agree with that, especially if you don't really know how to use it and you had no kind of like, you know, previous education. Like I was on Usenet since the mid '90s, and I created this character, and it was pure like chaos magic. I would invert things, and I would test things. A lot of it was satirical things, like I'd write satirical stories about show bands in Ireland that were like run by Joseph Mengele and a teddy bear invasion of Limerick, that kind of thing, and the Limerick people defending themselves with screwdrivers against an army of teddy bears carrying uh, basic hygiene products. It was like that kind of thing. Another one was like a commando mission to smuggle a toothbrush into Mullingar so people could so they could learn about dental hygiene, like that kind of stuff. Very kind of like it was happening around the same time the Father Ted was kind of happening. So, but it was all very done in a very kind of esoteric way. Like I would create false Fortean events, like that a UFO had come out of Ben Bulben and had been, and then bizarrely a few months later, a massive UFO flap happened in the next mountains down, which is kind of weird. So anyway, yeah, so that could have been that. So yeah, that was great training for me. So by the time social media came along, I'd already been through Usenet, all the sort of like fantastic, when the web was fantastic, GeoCities was full of chaos magic stuff, Tripod, remember all those free things, Yahoo, all those free websites, and amazing stuff. They were full of, oh my God, so much. I know a lot of those have been stored on archives, but my God, there was an enormous canon of Discordia, chaos stuff on those sites that's been sadly probably lost. And then that was, then kind of like the beginning of today's social media was MySpace, which I thought was great because you could put music and stuff on it. And then that eventually became, the horror that is Facebook and everything else, which, I was permanently thrown off of recently, along with Instagram and Twitter. So X as it's called now. So it's really that's all I've got is Telegram, and I'm kind of happy on Telegram because Telegram is kind of like making me think the wave function is happening again because it's going back. It's almost like a version of MySpace. It's really interesting. It took me a while to get used to it, but now I really kind of love it. But so join me on Telegram, Thomas Sheridan's Crack House. But yeah, so social media, like Reddit, it became the whole chaos discordia thing was taken over by shitheads, shitbags, to the point now where a gang of them have probably almost certainly created a plot to murder a man in front of his own children in Utah. So that's it. Now the two watches. Okay, what's the purpose of the two watches? Well, during my magical experiments, I would have a digital watch or a digital clock. I had a little clock back then, and an analog one. Okay, or two digital ones. It was in the original experiments were done back in the day with two. I think actually Monroe Institute even did them with two analog clocks or watches. So basically, what you would do is you would get your digital watch, and I had a good Casio one. No, it was a no. I think it was no, it was a Timex. Remember them? I had a good Timex digital watch, and I had a Citizen, a good very. No, sorry, I was stolen on me actually. A Citizen analog watch, very very accurate. Uh, Practically a chronometer. So a military grade watch. So one of the experiments would be that you would set them up to the second, right? Now, so if you had like, and I remember these watches lose like a second every 20 days, so you wouldn't do it for a month, but you would find what you would do is you would affect your nervous system, so you would detach yourself from quantum space-time reality. Okay, so there's no clock speed in the human brain. But the human brain, because of perception, because of our nervous system, and particularly because of our relationship to the seasons, is locked into this, and things like the cycle of the moon. tides is locked into the menstrual cycle on women, in fact, is locked into this reality in a specific way. But you can have two realities. Now, so one of the things you would do is I would go put the digital watch inside a box, a lead line box, right? Now, by lead line, if you couldn't get lead all around it, you could paint it in lead paint, okay? And then you would set them exact to the second, and then you would plan on doing the operational working. Now, remember, magic is an art and a science. The art part is that some are better than others, or if you have to practice at it to get better. And the science is that there's quantifiable things you can do to cause change in the material world. So I put the digital watch in here, and I would put that in the lead box, and I would just put it away. And then I would make sure I was going to do something extreme, like an extreme weekend, or this kind of thing, or travel a distance. I remember one time going to see I think it was seeing some band, and coming back, or even might have been playing in a band myself, and building my nervous system peaking. Find something to peak your nervous system into a different reality. Now, you know, when they say things like when you're depressed, time drags, and when you're excited, time speeds up. That's not just an expression. That's true, because there is the lock within your nervous system, in your central nervous system, with this chronological measurement, this chronological quantum quantification of this, right? It it's alterable. It always has been. It has been loads of things that to prove this. For instance, you've heard me talk about this for years, but it's still true. There's no way that when a pitcher throws a ball at a baseball player, say in the NBA, a professional baseball player, say in Yankee Stadium, he's holding the bat. There's no way from the distance from the pitcher to the batter, there is not enough time for the human nervous system to react to the speed of that ball and hit it. It's not possible with our nervous system, okay? There's several things going on. One, the the batter sends himself, his consciousness goes forward in time to the point where the ball is thrown. He then calculates, comes back in time to the present, and calculates the trajectory of the swing of his arm in the central nervous system according to the pitch by the guy throwing the ball. And there's probably also a connection through the mirror neurons in the frontal cortex, which create what empathy means. Empathy has nothing to do with the new age thing. Oh, I'm empathic. That's compassion. Empathy means a common understanding. So that goes forward in time, hits the ball, and makes the hit. Bang, home run. Okay, so that's an art and a science, right? The science is that he has to transcend. And you can watch stuff online about this. This has not been quantified. The limitations of his nervous system, travels forward in space time, comes back in space time, and if he's really good at it, he'll hit a home run. That's the art. Some are better than others. Okay, you can see that with footballers. You can see that with like Ronaldo when he's playing for Portugal or wherever one of the teams he's playing. The guy's like, I think he's in his 40s now, and he's still like playing at the highest level. He has that ability. I know, and a lot of carry on he does. Like when someone touches him, he goes, yeah. I mean, that's a lot as an act to break up sort of like something that might be affecting upon his nervous system. I've seen him take free kicks, and you can see him going into an almost like a meditative state. So that's the art and the science. He's better at the art of playing soccer than most other people. But he also still has to learn how to play the rules, calculate how far he has to, send that ball over towards the winger, and this kind of thing, or just the right height for the midfielder to head it in to the goal. And so you can learn a lot from sport like that. Where am I going with all this? Well, when I used to come back from the sort of like, I would call it the exhilarating weekend, there was sometimes up to 2 minutes difference between the analog watch and the digital watch. I had gained, time flies when you're having fun. I had gained 2 minutes over, say, a course of a Saturday and a Sunday. which showed to demonstrated that there was, or sometimes there were two digital watches. It was the same. Wouldn't matter. Two digital watches are the ideal way to do it, but they're not. It's the problem is because it's electronics, you kind of are affect. You can have the danger of affecting that by your nervous system. Where if it's just an analog watch, there's no problem with that. So there's a lot. You'd write a whole. I could write a whole book on these experiments I've done, and but I haven't invented them. These were all like kind of like what we were talking about back in the Discordian. So that was what the Discordia used to talk about when I was growing up. Now the Discordia is fellows who dress up as furry animals and masturbate on each other and share kiddie porn. It's horrific, and that brings us to where we're going. It's pretty obvious now to those of us who are like, and you don't have to be on the right, those of us who are, lots of people on the left have left the Democratic Party recently for the same reason. It's very apparent that there's millions of people on this world, and it became apparent in 2020. It was even before the needlecraft. It became very apparent uh, with the behavior towards the lockdowns. You saw some of us were like, "Is this really happening?" I'm talking about like May 2020, where millions and millions and millions were enthusiastic about it, and you're like, "What?" Uh, you know, that's when they started to begin. I think something happened in 2018 and 2019. 2018, I was very heavily involved in sort of like really got into like magic again, big time, and tremendous experiments. And I even achieved levitation. I know it sounds amazing to people, but yeah, I did it. And just like these, you can do these things. Just like a woman disappeared in front of me, she made herself vanish. And how that was done was, that'd be for another video. But basically, it wasn't or vanishing. It was the photons that my mind reads coming off her physical being that started to dissolve. I started the photons started not happening, so she started going visible, but she was still there, but invisible in terms of my perception through the photons hitting the back of my retinas and then being sent into my neural pathways. And that's how lots of magic is done. It's a science. It's not like it's not like witchy poos with their cursing oil and all this stuff, and their lemon spells. It's like this this real stuff here, and it's like you 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 have to do the science as well as the actual thing. It's no use just being that was like the American rocket scientist Jack Parsons' great gift. His magical writings are fantastic. So as are uh, in that they would have been kind of like the pre-chaos magic. He would have been like the Phil Hine and Peter Carroll before they came along. And he's because he was a scientist, he also was very good at magic. You'll find that like even that's why things like CERN and stuff like that. I mean, many of those guys there are more like at this point they're more akin to occultists than they are to actual scientists. This is what's happening there, and it's also maybe causing damage in this reality. It might be even the cause of what we're talking about now. But these people are now, if you haven't figured it out by now, they're living on a different timeline. Not only a different timeline, but they're living on a different quantum chronological experience. Now, some of the theories of some of the most quantum theory has been validated stronger and better than any other scientific theory. That's why the materialist scientists hate it. They absolutely hate it for that reason, because it proves that woo is true. And the current belief is, 3 years ago, the Nobel Prize for Physics was given to a paper on quantum retrocausality. This means you can go back in time and change it, and change the present. You can go back in time and change the present. Now, how this is possible is there's like a mirrored image of reality. One is rushing this way and one is rushing in the other direction, and they're in tandem. So you're locked between the reality that's running into the future and the quantum reality or experience that's running into the past. You're locked in the middle, right? And occasionally there will be glitches that may make you see things, and that's also an experiment with the two watches, how this works. That will make change things where you'll get the Mandela effect. Sorry, you will have like what seems like what they call fractures in the matrix. Okay, now these are mirrored states. So one is they're both very similar except they're mirrored. Now I was watching like a news report yesterday, and it's a classic example of this. They had a guy reporting on Tyler Robinson about how his touching letter to his beloved, they, she, him, whatever, and all these types. They're already in a different. They're on the other timeline. They're in there, going in the other direction. They're living on a timeline where pedophilia is legal, and the world is basically all the liberal crazy stuff has come true. The worst of it. The worst of it. We're moving in the other direction, heading towards what we'd like to think is a rational thing. They're an emotional one. Okay, but we need both. They work together, right? They've because of this fracturing in reality, every something major like 9/11 or Charlie Cook's thing, we have a separation of these two things, and the mirrored image becomes very apparent. So we're looking, right now and saying, you're saying to yourself, is every single person who's a liberal or progressive a psychopath, a cold-blooded psychopath who dances on the grave of a man who was shot, who believes that he was a Nazi who deserved it with no proof? Are they all pedophiles, like your man Zinn, or the one that Kyle Rittenhouse shot? Are all Antifa pedophiles? Yes, they are. Are they all cross-dressers and furries and sex cases? Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Because they're living in a reality where that's the norm. We're in a different reality where that's not the norm. So you cannot conflict. So you cannot find resolution between these dichotomies. You cannot. That's why I'm saying I've given up explaining. Like when my liberal friends are all laughing at Charlie Cook's death because you're very lucky to be on this channel. Me giving. I mean, I'm not boasting, but you're getting a phenomenal esoteric education here that people charge. It's all far less than me charge huge amounts of money to like talk to you on Indeed. I'm giving it to you for free. So and I'm glad to do it because it's good for all of us to learn this because someone did this to me. Just now I have the internet, I can do it to more people than just one. So yeah, and so they're on a different timeline reality. They're in a different world. They're on the other side of the mirror. Those like people often mirrors are very peculiar things. Yeah, I know you can when you look you put the whole thing of putting a pad up on the mirror and you can look behind and yeah, I know there's a scientific reason for that, but it's still fucking amazing how that works. That is the the refractive light and the photons. That is and your perception of it. That exactly is art and science causing change in the material world. Mirrors are remarkable things, and so that's that. That's that one thing. Now, on a sort of an other aspect, I don't think that they should execute Tyler Robinson by firing squad. I'll tell you why. They'll make a martyr of him because they're giving him a soldier's debt. So all these, I'll shoot him myself. As I'm Megan Kelly saying, I'll shoot him myself, and I don't blame her for feeling that way. But you're going to give him a martyr's death. You're going to give him a soldier's ending. Firing squad is an honourable end. And in Ireland in 1916, we know the power of a national figure being sent to the firing squad and being elevated into almost a living god. And that's what they'll do with him. You'll have all the Bruce Springsteen to the future singing about him, going, and Tyler Robinson, he died for he, she, they, them. He fought against the fascists. That's what you'll have. That's what you'll get. It'd be much better to execute him by lethal injection, something really like something unglamorous. That's not a soldier's death. A soldier's death would be a firing squad. I would, if it was execute him, lethal injection or the electric chair. The electric chair, but I would say lethal injection. Just make it. Those types would be all in favor of things like assisted dying and stuff. So let's give them their death. the loser's debt. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with killing yourself if you've no other option, but I'm saying the firing squad will just make him into a martyr. People aren't thinking theirs. They don't give him a soldier's debt. And that's also an esoteric thing as well. That's why the Patrick Pearse and the leaders of the 1916 rebellion in Ireland, they wanted to go against the firing squad because they knew it would have a sort of a transformative effect in that the people would go, holy shit, and it's almost like a kind of a Gnostic mass of capital punishment. I wouldn't give him the firing squad. Even do you remember like Gary Gilmore? There was that song by the Adverts, "Looking Through Gary." I think he was the last person in America executed by firing. Well, it was. They made a big deal of it. I don't know if he was the last one, but he became a folk hero because he was executed by firing squad. Just lethal injection is probably the best way to take him out. And if he's guilty, which he looks like he is, and the others too. I mean, there's going to be a lot of neckbeards and socialists who are going from like Reddit and everything who are going to find themselves, if not lengthy prison cells, capital punishments, capital offences, are all involved in this. So it's dark as it gets, but they're all living in a reality where they're heroes. They in their minds they killed Hitler. That's how they think in their reality, and you cannot go into their reality and convince them that it was just a guy who basically debated with people and harmed nobody really. No, you will not go there. They're in a different reality. They know you will not go there. The best thing is to sort of in my main function now, along with helping you guys with an esoteric magical education, is to continue on my work into the whatever I do. I don't even know what it is. I've got a couple of films coming up that I'm a star in, and one on that kind of thing, and I also try to. My main objective is to try to make sure that I'm definitely on that wave function line when it collapses back into the September 10th, 2001 timeline. It doesn't mean we're going back there. It just goes back to the state we were in. The better, our nervous systems are more in tune with the reality, the parameters of the reality of Earth at that time. We're not going to go back to that physical date. We'll have that sense. And it seems to be happening. You have a lot of people, I saw a discussion between Rick Rubin and Megyn Kelly this morning. And you could see the difference between them and the foaming at the mouth left. Like we had this guy in Ireland here, Jim Brawley, who basically did the same thing as Stephen King, more or less tweeted that Charlie Kirk had it coming. Absolutely shocking stuff. Well, they're already in a different reality, okay? Uh, but they might Rick Rubin and Megyn Kelly were talking. I'm not a left winger, right winger. I'm definitely a central. I was looking at this sounds like a news report that would happen before September 10, 11, 2001. So I'm definitely no matter what, that could go any other way. That could go different directions. They could easily fuck it all up by putting him in front of a firing squad and making him into a folk hero, another Che Guevara for transsexuals and troons. But even so, my job is to because I know that this game, what you perceive in this reality, is optional. Of course, you're subject to entropy. You get old, you get fat, you get tired. That's all. You start aching. That's all. You go grey. That's real, but because that's part of the system as well. Because at this stage in your life, you start thinking about the next life, the next world, the next time around. If you're a Christian, you think about, and this is if you're a female, this is your crone. You're developing your crone, or your hag, and if you're a male, you're developing your senex. You have that kind of the individuation that Carl Jung spoke about happens now, and so I think my individuation and many of the people who watch my videos realize that it's getting back to that quantum timeline that we had before 9/11, that was thrown into absolute chaos and caused horrific wars in the Middle East and everything, and get back to, we're not going to utopia. We're getting back to a a groove that's more in tandem with how our nervous systems have developed. And it doesn't matter if you were, even if you weren't even born before 9/11, as you could have been born in, the 2000s. It's you will still you'll know, my nervous system is not right for this reality that they're foisting on me. This sort of like, this progressive woke reality. Just imagine that in the other side of that moving timeline, all the woke stuff is the norm. And this schism happens between the conflicts where the two realities are rushing past each other, and glitches happen, and we see that for what it really is, and they see us for what we really are, and we realize that we've got to pick one that won't destroy us. And I know the one that won't destroy us is the present one we're on, to collapse that wave, that 9/11 wave function. So if you don't think that's all bullshit, just mull it over, think it over. This is a time for brevity and making your point directly. It's not a time for overusing language and concepts. I think we need clarity and focus. If you look at videos of teenagers in the 1980s and young people, or any people in the 1980s, they have a stability about them, and that stability is caused by a lack of distortion. Okay, and that's the irony of it. Back then, the chaos magic scene and Discordia was a way to play with that stuff, to see other realities outside it. Now we live in a totally disruptive reality. Well, it's getting better, and ironically, the way out of that is is brevity, is focus, and and going with what feels right to you. And there you go. So again, I didn't make this video because I'm trying to capitalize on the poor man's murder. But as the truthers are exploding with their nonsense and all that kind of shit, I think, calm down, have a listen to your inner voice, and use your ass, and the rest will follow. Sanguine gnosis.